All right, we are now recording. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's presentation. This is kind of a joint effort between SUNY OER Services, the SUNY Center for Professional Development, and SUNY OLIS, the Office of Library Services, because everybody wants to learn about AI and OER and those two things together. Our presenter today is Dan Barrancotta. He is an educator and instructional designer with experience in workforce development, K-12, and higher education. Dan currently serves as an instructor at Western Governors University in the Education Technology and Instructional Design graduate program. He's also the instructor for SUNY CPD's Instructional Design Certificate Program, and he serves as an adjunct instructor at SUNY Genesee Community College. His philosophy is centered around transformative leadership and the belief that every learner is unique and brings valuable knowledge and experience with them that can benefit the group. He seeks to develop diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning experiences that foster a classroom community where all learners can learn with and from each other to accomplish their goals and drive change in the workforce. So again, if you can keep yourself muted and throw any questions in the chat, and I will turn it over to Dan. Welcome.
All right, thanks, and thank you all for being here and joining us today. As Corey mentioned, I think this is an exciting topic and something that we're all trying to wrap our heads around and learn and continue to learn. And so much of the narrative around AI, I think, started off with sort of that fear and how students are going to use it to cheat. And I hope that we're shifting some of that and how can we use it as educators, instructional designers, teachers, professors, whatever it might be, how can we use this to help ourselves and to help our students learn? And that's what we're going to really try to get into today. I'm going to touch on a few different areas and a few different topics. I by no means want to say that I am the definitive or final voice or say on any of this. This is a rapidly evolving process, and there's a lot that's going to be different from campus to campus, from person to person. And as things sort of go, by the time we get done with this presentation today, there might be a new AI tool that's out there and a new way to kind of do things. So I encourage you to take everything that you're learning here and that you're hearing, always take it with a grain of salt, find what works for you, find what works on your campus, but keep learning, keep evolving, and keep staying up with it. As we go today, as Corey mentioned, please do feel free to throw questions in the chat. I'll try to get to them sort of as we go if I can, but we'll certainly have some time at the end for some question and answer. I'm going to get started and go through a few things, a few slides, and then I want to dive in and just really share sort of an example of how we can do this and kind of walk you through that, because I think that's a little bit of a better way to learn and start to contextualize this process and what these generative AI tools can do for you and get you thinking about that. So we'll do some broad overview stuff at the beginning. I'm going to share some examples and work through sort of a case study with you, and then we'll have plenty of time for question and answer at the end. And Corey did a wonderful introduction to me. I appreciate that. I just want to share this little picture of my newborn daughter here. She's just 2 weeks old now. We just had her. That's Gianna, with our 3-year-old Ariana there, my wife Alexa and I. I'm just coming at this from the perspective of somebody that's using this, that's trying to use it to help my students, somebody that's trying to help teach students that are going to be instructional designers and that are going to be teachers as well. So that's kind of my background, and I want you to kind of where my maybe frame of reference is coming from with a lot of this. It's from an educator standpoint, as an educator myself, but also somebody that's trying to teach and prepare educators. So some of this, as we get started, I think it's important to always sort of cover this and think about this. Many of you may, have a very good understanding of AI and how it works, and others may still not quite be sure. But I think it's what we're going to talk about today primarily is generative AI, and then specifically ChatGPT. There's a lot of different AI tools that are out there. There's generative AI tools that can be text-based. They can be make videos, images, visuals, all kinds of different tools. ChatGPT is just one of those. It is one of the more commonly widely used. It's free and accessible to everyone right now. Google Gemini is another similar product. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm a proponent of ChatGPT over the others. If you feel like, Microsoft Copilot works for you or Google Gemini works for you. You can really use those sort of interchangeably when we say ChatGPT today. ChatGPT is just the tool that I tend to use, and it's one that seems to, I think, resonate with folks in terms of just that naming mechanism. We kind of, I think, hear that most often, even if that's not necessarily the only one or the one people are using. They sort of refer to this idea of generative AI as ChatGPT. So what is this generative AI, and how does it work? And I think the way I like to try to explain this to folks, I think is helpful in thinking about it this way when we start to use it. And it's essentially a model, a platform. It's code. It's hundreds and thousands of lines of code that teaches this tool to continue to learn and continue to essentially scour the internet and all the different inputs and outputs that have been through there to continue to learn, to essentially recognize patterns in data. And it's trying to anticipate sort of the next word in a pattern. When we start a sentence and we start a conversation, sometimes we start talking and we're not entirely sure what's going to come next. But as we sort of say each word, we start to fill in the blanks and we start to think about, okay, this is, makes sense to come next. This is what I want to say. This is the track that I'm going. And as I get further and further into this conversation, it becomes more and more clear what I'm trying to say. And that's essentially what these generative AI tools for text-based work are doing. They're following those patterns and they're going word by word to try to find the best sort of response based on your input. The way I like to visualize this and think about it when I'm using it, and I encourage all of you to do, is if you think back to those, early internet days when we had chat rooms and the AOL instant messengers and things like that. Think of this as that. You're in a chat room, you're having an instant message conversation with somebody on the other side of the screen. It's ChatGPT, it's not a real person, but sort of pretend like it's a real person on the other side of the screen there. And that person is the fastest learner in the world. They're not necessarily going out there to create their own new things. They don't necessarily know everything, but you can ask it a question, you can give it a sort of a task or an assignment, and it's able to go learn and teach itself how to respond to that faster than any human being can. And that's the way I think we want to try to recognize that it's not a foolproof system. It doesn't have the perfect answer for everything ready to go. It can be wrong sometimes, just like a person could be wrong on the other side of a chat room. It can do better at certain things than others, and we want to just kind of recognize that. But I think when we have that idea of there's sort of somebody on the other side of that screen or the other side of the keyboard, that helps us in the way that we carry on what I like to refer to as a conversation and be conversational with the tool. And we'll get into that a little bit more with prompt engineering coming up. And as I mentioned, there's a ton of different things, about generative AI and using all of this. This is a really great resource here, and I'm going to share these links as well at the end. Corey just put it in the chat, but that's a good spot, I think, a pretty inclusive resource that if you're trying to take a look at a few different topics here, that's a good place to kind of get started, I think, as well, and how strengths might be. So what we want to try to talk about primarily and focus on today is how can we use AI for content creation and making open educational resources. And that's what we're really sort of focused on. We have this tool. Again, we're not thinking about it today in terms of how students might use it, but how can we use it as educators, and what can it do for us? And we have maybe access to these generative AI tools where we can create things. How can we take those creations and share them with our students to help them learn? And in doing so, are we able to create learning environments and learning resources and materials and experiences that are free and open and accessible to our learners? And I think that's a really important topic, sort of in and of itself, the use of OER and how we can reduce costs and improve equity and inclusion and things like that, and sort of avoid some of those high cost resources. And also what this does is gives us a chance to really generate and create some specific content for exactly what our needs are and the needs of our students. And obviously that becomes very cost effective when rather than having students spend, a lot of money for a particular resource, if we're able to provide them with some content that they're able to access for free. We also have the ability to make it really personalized. when you're making this content, you're going to get exactly what you need and what your students need. You can form it to fit. Maybe there's two books that you really like, and half this book and half that book, or you're kind of piecemealing things together. Is there a way you can find exactly what you need? And when we're doing that, we also have the ability to sort of, reduce those costs and those barriers, but we can, which help with inclusion, but also the way we create these resources and materials can also benefit and promote that idea of equity and inclusion as well. So how can we use this? What can we do with it? Where should we maybe be going? What can this do? And I like to think of this using AI, leveraging AI sort of as a supplement to our own teaching to help us grow as teachers and educators. We're all very busy, obviously. There's a lot going on. We all wish we had more hours in the day. We wish we could maybe do things a little bit differently, but sometimes we're just kind of, using what we're using because it tends to work and it's working well enough, and we just don't have the time for those updates and overhauls. But what these generative AI tools can be is almost like a teaching assistant or an administrative assistant for you. It's a way that you can become so much more time efficient, and you can maybe get to some of these tasks that you haven't done before. And there's a lot of different things that you can use in terms of updating assessments, creating rubrics, making new test questions or new assignments and assessments and all of those types of things, but also for making those course materials. Are we seeing specific areas of a course where students are struggling? If you have a midterm test and as you're reviewing that midterm, you find out that half the students missed question number 7 on your midterm. Well, are we to blame half the students for missing that question? Or maybe could we be a little more reflective and look at ourselves and look at our materials and think, okay, maybe there's a better way to teach this. Maybe we need to support our students better so that they learn this particular topic better and they're able to perform better on that midterm and answer this question correctly. And when we do that and we can identify these friction points, we can then get to work on improving our overall course materials, and we can leverage the AI tools to do that. So is there a new resource that we might be able to create? Is there some new content that we could add? Is there a better way to explain this? Could we ask AI to give us an analogy or to write a story for us? Could we create a video or some photos or some visuals here about this particular topic? In the lines of universal design for learning, there's a lot of different ways students can learn, and can we use these AI tools to help promote that and make better learning resources for our students? So we certainly don't need to totally overhaul an entire course and every single learning resource. It could just be sort of those one-off things that we're recognizing as they go, which is really sort of a best practice, that idea of continuous iteration, as we're designing and as we're teaching and as we're educating folks. We always want to be on the lookout for those friction points. We always want to be improving that overall student experience. We want to be, getting that feedback, whether it's explicit or implicit, things students are specifically saying, or maybe things that we're seeing. Students aren't completing an assignment, or they're not engaging in a particular page or resource that we're sharing in an LMS, whatever it might be. Find those areas where you can improve and do something a little bit different, and then leverage the tool to do that. I think one of the big hot button type questions or ideas here is the centers around legal and ethical concerns and different considerations that we want to take into account. And again, a lot of this started when ChatGPT went live and these generative AI tools came out. Was how are students using it to cheat and to pass off their work? That's a little bit different than what we're doing. And again, there's, I think, also a lot more to be sort of decided by other folks. It's not going to come down necessarily to me or you or any one person. As they say in a lot of different cases, there will be lawyers, and I think there will be continue to be court cases and legal findings and proceedings that are going to define and clarify some of these things. But again, it's such a rapidly evolving process. It's hard to always wrap your head around exactly what's required, what's right, what's okay, what's not okay. Um, but I encourage you with this is to sort of think about things a little bit differently sometimes, right? There's differences between plagiarism and copyright. We've been using AI tools for a long time. Many of you remember the old clip art icon in Microsoft Word and those original versions of Microsoft Word that would pop up. And we have had spelling and grammar checks in Microsoft Word for decades, and that those are AI tools, and we've been using them. The difference is, right, I think the way I like to explain this is if a student goes home and they bounce an idea off, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, and they have a conversation with them about what they might write, a project on or an essay, or they write that essay and they ask somebody to proofread it, that's one thing. If they go home and ask that person to completely write the project or completely write the essay and then put their own name on it and pass somebody else's work off as their own, that's a completely different thing. So I think that's a starting point for how to sort of discern and separate some of these ideas and things when we use it in terms of the context that we're talking about today. A couple ideas that we want to keep a mind of with plagiarism and copyright. If you were to sort of go and create some work on ChatGPT right now, it's not owned by ChatGPT. So you're able to take what you use and you can use that work. Things that are created by ChatGPT or through generative AI are not copyrightable. So that means that ChatGPT doesn't have ownership of that. If you take some of that work and you create your own things and you add to it, what you add to it can eventually be copy. You could file for copyright, but in using things that are created from ChatGPT, you're not violating any copyright infringements. What you need to be careful of is if ChatGPT were to pull largely from a particular source that was protected under copyright laws and protections, that could potentially happen. So you always need to review your work. And that would sort of also fall in lines potentially with a little bit of plagiarism there, where if it's copying large chunks of a single source, which can happen, that could be, plagiarism or copyright issues. So those are things to keep in mind. The best piece of advice I can give you if you're concerned about that is when you use ChatGPT, you use generative AI, we're going to talk about prompt engineering to try to get some very specific things and create very specific outputs for you, which will limit those possibilities. But I think maybe the simplest way to check that is if you can, if you have Brightspace, if you have an LMS and you have some type of plagiarism detection tool like Turnitin or things like that, you can submit your work to that Turnitin tool and use that and get that response that we use sometimes with our students in terms of, should this have been cited? Should that have been cited? That's a great way to sort of take what you've created in ChatGPT and check it before publishing it on your course or passing it off to your students. I don't think that you need to necessarily say specifically, every single thing or like an internal citation, if you will, for every big idea that's in a course if you're using, ChatGPT to create content. But I think it's always a best practice to sort of mention, somewhere in your course, somewhere on that page, somewhere in that module that you are in fact using generative AI as an assistant. And I'm going to demonstrate sort of a specific way to maybe call that out and put that in the LMS as well, just to sort of I think it can help make sure that you're feeling comfortable with using it, that we're attributing, things appropriately, but also we're sort of opening that door to, hey, this is a really powerful tool and I'm using it, and we're letting our students know that, and we're just being very transparent with that process. And when we're showing that I'm using this, then they're more likely to show us when they're using it. And that's another way to sort of, circle around and get back to that idea of students using this to cheat. Because at the end of the day, it's there, they're using it. Let's find ways that we can leverage it to help them learn as well. So, and then again, that's a whole conversation for another day. But I do encourage you to use this. I do encourage you to let your students know that you're using it when you do. And I do sort of am a proponent of saying, I think it's safe to say that, using it and putting it in your course is not necessarily, automatically by any means some type of plagiarism or copyright issue. I think do your due diligence to make sure that there's not those issues. Be aware of any, on-campus policies and things of that nature, but recognize that you do not have to necessarily attribute something that you pull out of ChatGPT to ChatGPT, for instance. So this idea of prompt engineering is something that I think is likely maybe I don't think it's an overstatement to say it's the most important. topic around generative AI use. I think when we think about prompt engineering and how we're doing it, this is the way that we can be successful and get what we want and really find, what we're looking for. If we're going to use a generative AI tool, we want to make sure that we are, in fact, prompt engineering and being, as specific and as clear as possible. And when we say prompt engineering, we prompt the tool, whatever it might be, ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or any other tool. You're prompting that tool to do something. The more specific we can be, the more we can sort of engineer those prompts, the more details we can add, the more we can ask, the better the output's going to be. So we input, we're going to get an output. The better our input, the better your output. And this is where I was talking before about being conversational. And I think that's so essential to this process that we want to have that conversation with the tool and with ChatGPT, because that allows us to be very specific about what we want. It allows us to continue the conversation. So if we're not getting exactly what we want or we need tweaks, we're able to kind of work through that. We can go back. The tool will remember what we asked it to do 10 minutes ago or 10 prompts ago, and we might change our mind and say we need something a little bit different, things of that nature. We might find as we go, we want to tweak or adjust things, and that's important. What we want to do to get our best content is continue that process of iteration. And when I say iteration, I just mean constantly evolving, updating new versions of it. We might start off with this idea that we want to, create some content to explain to our students, the process of photosynthesis. If we just say, teach me photosynthesis, you're going to get an output that's going to teach you about photosynthesis. But if you're very specific and you're explaining exactly what course and exactly what level and what reading level you want that to be at, and maybe all these other things, and do you want it to be text-based? How long of text do you want? Would you like a visual aid? Are you going to use this for PowerPoint slides? And depending on how you're going to do it and what you want, the more specific you can be, the better results you're going to get from that output. And that's where that idea of conversation comes into play. You're never limited based on the output. If you get something you don't like, or you think it could be better, or you think you want something different, just ask. If you're not sure what you want to ask for or how to do this the best way, also just ask. It will give you a lot of ideas about what to sort of prompt with. It will give you a lot of ideas about what maybe you might want to say or do next, or how to present content. If you're not real comfortable about instructional design in general, you can always add specific prompts that you want to make use of best practices of online teaching or universal design for learning, or the best instructional design practices for chunking content and information. You can say things like that to ChatGPT before you ask it to write you that content on photosynthesis. And then that output is going to take all of those things that it's learned about universal design for learning or chunking information, and it's going to use that and apply that to the content that it's creating. So some real sort of, I think, you just practical takeaways, things I think that I want to make sure we highlight is, make sure you understand your institutional's policy on intellectual property and AI use. Those are things that, again, sometimes work hand in hand, sometimes are the same, and sometimes are very different. And plagiarism and copyright and intellectual property and just attributions and things, those are all different sort of pathways, and there can be different meaning to those, and different expectations. So make sure you're recognizing what it is that you're actually trying to do and what you need to do to best fall in line with what your institution requires. Whenever you're going to use any type of AI generated content, I think it's important to make sure you take ownership of that, and that you're reviewing it, that you're editing it, that you're making sure that it's fair, it's accurate, it's inclusive, that the language is appropriate, that the information there is factual. If you're going to publish something and put it into your course, and when I say publish, I don't mean publish it in a book or through sort of those traditional sense. But if you're going to put this new resource or infographic or study guide or PowerPoint slideshow into your coursework, before you use that, before you show it to other people, you want to make sure that you're taking ownership of that you've done the work to make sure that you're sharing appropriate information. As I mentioned, I think the idea of using an originality checking tool like Turnitin, a plagiarism detection tool, things like that, is a really good idea. It's a maybe a simple thing to do, but a good way to feel comfortable about what you have. Being appropriate, right? That's what we would sort of expect our students to do, and with the standard we would hold them to. You can, like I mentioned, put something into ChatGPT and get an output that's going to really pull from a particular source, and you want to make sure you're attributing that if required. So finding that out and seeing that, and there's no way to know that that is or isn't going to be the case until you check it. So again, using those originality checking tools is a good way to sort of protect yourself and make sure you're doing the right thing there. And then I also think and encourage you to be transparent, that you're using it. That doesn't mean that you have to have a neon sign flashing. It doesn't mean that every sentence has to be, with an internal citation that says ChatGPT 2005 or whatever it might be. But mention that you're using these things. Mention that it's there, maybe at the bottom of the page or at the introduction of a module and things like that. And I'll show an example of that in just a minute. But again, we're sort of embracing this idea that this is our new reality. These are tools that are just simply too good to leave out there. I think we're being naive if we think that we can do better than these tools a lot of times. I think these tools can help us be better. There's a lot that we have to offer, but the lot that these tools have to offer. And when we can sort of connect those and bring those together, and it's not a me versus ChatGPT type mindset, but how can I use ChatGPT to help my students? There's a lot that we can do with that, and I think it's a really good idea for you to try to embrace that. So what I want to take a look at now is I'm going to show some specific prompts that I've used and kind of walk you through a conversation I had with ChatGPT, and then also show some content that I built in Brightspace as a result of those conversations with ChatGPT. And I just want to give you sort of that real world example of that conversation, of how things went, and we'll take a look at it, and you can kind of see it. The topic of conversation or content that's relevant to you, it could be anything. Remember, this is the fastest learner in the world, so there's not necessarily anything that's too basic or too complex for it. Anything that's out there that you want to teach or that you're instructing, you can use this for. I selected just to do a little module on resume development, so it was sort of something simple and easy for everybody to understand and sort of appreciate as we go here. I just gotta switch my screen here. Okay, and I'm going to share this specific link to this conversation that I had with ChatGPT with you all. And it is a part of this. So you'll have access to it so you can go back and take a look at it and kind of follow some of that idea of prompt engineering and things like that as well. And you'll be able to see that and refer to it maybe as a guide for yourself. So, okay, so this is my first initial prompt here. I'm having a conversation with ChatGPT. I'm going to let it know exactly what I'm looking for and what I want. Um, Give it as much detail as you can. So right off the bat, we're explaining what I am and what I'm doing. I'm a college professor. I'm teaching a career and educational planning course at SUNY Genesee Community College. Putting that information in there is going to help the tool know, okay, is this for a K-12 classroom, a community college? Is this a graduate level? Those things might seem trivial in terms of these initial prompts, but can really help you. And you can just kind of let it know what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish, because again, that's going to help it better guide you as you have questions along the way. So I'm trying to just update some things, iterative design process. I want to provide my students with free resources so they don't need to purchase any textbooks. I want to update the course. I'm teaching about resumes here. I'm attaching the course syllabus for you to review and better understand my class. That is I highly, highly recommend that. If you are doing things for a particular course, you can attach your syllabus. You can attach anything that you have or that you want the chat tool to know about your course. So by giving the chat GPT my syllabus, it has access to all of the learning outcomes, the course descriptions, prerequisites, the different policies, the assignments that are there, and it can read all of that quickly and understand sort of what I'm trying to accomplish with my course and have a better idea of how it's going to want to create the materials that I'll ask it for. I also, included a link to a website. This is a resource from Indeed that I've come across that I think does a really good job sharing about creating resumes and cover letters. So I want to give that to ChatGPT to kind of use that as a baseline for some of the information. I'm just saying, hey, I really like this content. Again, if you had a PDF article, if you had a PowerPoint that you've used for years, you can plug that in here. So you're giving it sort of that baseline and letting it know what you're trying to kind of guide this new content around. I'm going to ask for some help creating content to teach students the basics and the best practices for creating professional resumes. Again, being specific, I want to be interested in current best practices to help recent graduates find jobs. And then just different things that I want to use, right? So concerns, things that are coming up now. How can we get our resumes past those AI bots that are reviewing resumes? That's a big topic. So let's make sure we include that right in here so it knows that's a part of it. I'm going to let it know I know my students, they generally prefer content that's simple, clear, and concise. I don't want real long winded things. I want to keep it clear, simple, keep it moving, and make sure they're getting it. I want to write all this content at a fifth grade reading level. That might seem really low, right? This is a college course, but do we need to use big words to explain these concepts? I don't think so. That might be true for this. It might not be true for one of your classes, but I think that's a good thing to put in there. Again, when we're trying to make our content as inclusive as possible, putting in the reading level that we expect our students to have is a very small thing to do. It's a few words, but that can really help with the output because some of these tools can be very wordy. They can be long-winded. So again, saying clear and concise, I think, is helpful and or important. And then they can also sometimes use unnecessarily big words, so to speak, where there's simpler ways to say things. Let's just say it in that simpler way. And then I'm going to let the chat tool know what I'm going to do. I'm going to provide some specific requests when you're ready. But do you have any questions for me? So again, if we're having a conversation, I'm expecting this tool to help me. Let me find out if it needs anything else from me. So, it gets right in there. And again, this idea of conversational, it'll be conversational. Thanks, Dan. And we'll go back and forth like this, and you can have sort of that. So it's going to let you know here's some questions that it had for me. What type of format preference? Do I want it to include information on AI bots? How do I want these to sort of look and things like that? Do I want lesson plans? All these things. So, I just go back with it and tell it, I'm going to take the material that you're using and I'm going to put it into a Brightspace LMS. So I'm letting it know what I'm doing. I'm going to go step by step. I don't want everything at once. Um, and then a good question that it had here, and I'll go back, were your students going to be using Microsoft Word or Google Docs? I thought that was a really interesting thing that it came up with to ask. And your campus might be Microsoft or Google, and you might want to be specific about that. So, I let it know that on my campus, students have Microsoft Word through the college. So it kind of lets them know what's going on there. Just looking in the chat, looks like a good question there. Limits regarding attaching supporting materials. That again, I would say beware of the privacy policies of the tool that you're using, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot. When you put things in, it's going to take that and it's going to learn from that. So I would never put in unpublished research or sensitive information, student names, things like that. But something like a syllabus, I think, is okay to put in there. These are your resources. It's going to learn from those resources, and it might use information from some of your inputs down the line to create other outputs for somebody else. So be aware of that. If you have concerns about not wanting things out there and you wouldn't share that sort of publicly, then I would say don't put it into ChatGPT. But if you're okay with, your syllabus being left on the table in the cafeteria on campus, or you would post it to, a website that anybody could get to, then I'd say there's no problem with putting that in there. But that might be a simple way to kind of think about it. Is that something that you would be okay with just being left out in the open and anybody having access to on campus. If it is, then I think it's okay to put in. If not, then you probably don't want to put that in to ChatGPT. And you can certainly redact parts of things in that nature, or describe something as well to kind of satisfy some of those concerns. So now it's letting me know it's ready. So go ahead with the first thing. And what I want to do here, the very first thing, good practice, backwards design, things like that, is I want to create something with a good module title. I want 2 to 4 learning objectives for this module. And I want to focus on the learner's ability to scaffold their learning or build their learning, ultimately to creating their own resume. And I want these learning objectives and this content, these ideas, that should link directly to the course learning objectives pertaining to resumes in the syllabus I attach. So it's going to pick that back up from the syllabus. What's ultimately that course learning objective? And we sort of always want those CLOs to be what we're teaching about. And how can I create some more clear learning objectives just for this particular module that helps scaffold and prepare students to meet that overall course objective. So it's going to pull here based on the course learning outcome. Now in my course and in that syllabus, it's very simple: prepare a resume. That's the CLO that deals with resumes. So it's pulling that out. It's letting me know that it did find that from my syllabus. And this is what it comes up with: a module title, some specific module learning objectives. Okay, I'm good with this. This is perfect. Now I want a 250-word module introduction that gives students an overview of the module. So this is going to be kind of our introductory type page. Here's my content. And then, okay, now let's build some content. I want it to list 5 to 10 best practices for resumes. Each best practice, I want to clearly articulate their importance and how we're going to sort of leverage these things. And I want to provide a free online resource to sort of encourage further learning and exploration. So I want some content, but I want some resources where students can learn more. So it goes through and it gives me this, and it gives me this list of 10 things. Now, I will say, be careful. Sometimes these links are not going to work. That is something I've come across a lot in ChatGPT. It'll look like a link, but it won't necessarily work, or it won't copy and paste in for you. But a lot of times what you can do is sort of take this link here, and you could copy and paste that text into Google, and then you'll find the appropriate link yourself. I'm not sure exactly why those problems are there sometimes, but I think it knows what it's trying to get to, but it's not creating a good link for it. But you can take sort of that text around it. How long should a resume be from Indeed? And there is a resource, there is a link on exactly that you can go pull the appropriate URL. But so it gives me these 10 best practices. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I asked. But as I'm looking at it, I think, okay, that's kind of big here. So what I want to do is split it up into 2 categories so I can kind of chunk it. I wanted to create category names for that, and then provide a 1-sentence introduction for each category. So it goes ahead and it'll do that. And we can kind of take a look at this point in here. I created a module, creating a resume that gets you noticed. That was the title that it gave me. We can start with our introductory page. We've got our title and our content. We listed our learning objectives. And this is what I mentioned here, instructor AI collaboration note. So I'm just putting it right in here at the beginning of this module. That some of the content in this module is developed with support from ChatGPT, an AI teaching assistant powered by OpenAI. All materials have been reviewed, edited, and customized by your instructor to align with the goals of this course and ensure they reflect the needs of SUNY GCC students. This is something here, this statement, that I'll show you, I asked ChatGPT to write. So that is something that you can always do. But I think just kind of sharing this, letting them know that, hey, I use this tool, but it was sort of a teaching assistant. You're letting them know how we used it. It wasn't just create this content on resumes and whatever it spit out is what I'm using. I'm letting them know how we used it. And then if we go over here, again, we asked for those 10 best practices. I asked it to split it into two groups of 5. So that's what we've got here. I was able to make use of an accordion. It gave a title to each of those categories. It gave the 1-sentence introduction. If I click the accordion, there's, why it matters, how to use it. And to learn more, that link that it provided, students can look on that. And, here you are with another resource that they can learn more. How long should your resume be? And there's more information for students to learn. So again, this is what I asked for, this is what it gave me, and then I plug it in, and I've got a really nice content page here on some big key things that we want to focus on, for creating good resumes. And as we kind of continue on, we're going to bounce around. You can do different things. Something that I thought of that maybe would be helpful here is, hey, can we write a short story that highlights the importance of a professional resume and making use of these best practices? So, in about 500 words, can you create a narrative of two recent graduates that, were applying for the same position in the business world, and one made use of these best practices, the other did not, and talk about why and how a hiring manager might select an applicant based on their resume. So we can give that practical real world experience. This is a great way for students to learn and connect their learning. Do we want to sit down and write a 500-word story? Do we have access to that? Maybe we can go find something else on the internet. Maybe you have time to do it, but more likely than not, you probably don't. But this might be a really good way for your students to learn and, sort of build on their learning and think about it. So go ahead and just ask ChatGPT to do it. And sure enough, it does. And it gives you sort of that text here, and it's giving you all that information. It goes through it. It'll explain why this matters. This is great. Can you format it into a Word document for me? Because maybe I want to include this as an attachment rather than just text on a page. So sure enough, it'll go ahead and put it into a Word document that you could click on and download. So now I've got this resource here, and I think, okay, that's great. So what now I want to do is conclude this module. How about 250 words to wrap it up, highlight the key points, link it back to the objectives. Sure enough, I'm going to get that here. But as I'm thinking about it, I forgot what I really wanted to do was make a content page that teaches students how to use resume templates in Microsoft Word. So I can still go back, right? It's not a linear process here. It's going to remember everything that you said. I save these everything I do, I try to do in a different sort of window of ChatGPT, and I'll go back to it weeks or months later, and it's going to remember everything that it's done and that you've asked it. So you can ask for that. Brightspace has a lot of cool templates, the tabs templates. So, I'm going to I want to make use of the tabs feature, limit it to 3 tabs, tell it exactly what I want, and boom, 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 it's going to give me all that. So if we go back here into Brightspace, this is getting started with resume templates. There's our quick introduction. Here's the content for the tabs that I asked for. And this is just me sort of copying and pasting that information and plugging it into Brightspace. It gave me a link to a YouTube video on how to make resumes in Word, and I've included that here. And then I get to that sort of, module summary page where it's going to wrap it up. And then I decided, the way Brightspace works, I wanted to include that story, but rather than just kind of having students pop to it on, by chance, I asked it to write an introduction here in a later prompt that explains what stories coming next, that Word document, and explain what that's about. And then that's going to come up. So it kind of gives that introduction. And then I also included another example of how you might want to put that collaboration note, at the end here. It could just be a little simple note like this at the bottom. But if we click our next page, we're going to see that tale of 2 resumes. This is the document that was completely created by ChatGPT, downloaded in Word. I didn't do a thing to touch it. This is just the way it came out. You could obviously update this. You could change formatting, but it is giving you even an accessible document that's making use of a heading structure there as well. So just wanted to highlight some of the different things that it can do in file formats as well. So all that's there. There's a lot of cool things that you can do. Something else that I asked for, what would be a good title is something. There's one other thing that I like to do here, if I can find it. I like to use, and it's another thing that I just like to kind of do, and it's in here somewhere I asked, but I like to use like quotes that help reinforce learning. And so I asked it to give me a quote, about resumes or things like that, and I ended up including it, I think, on the very first page. But you can ask it for a quote on a particular topic. Sometimes I think that helps connect learning and ideas. It can kind of spruce up your course a little bit. And then you can use different elements, sort of here it is at the bottom. Your resume is a marketing tool. It tells the story of who you are and what you can do. So make it count. So just kind of a way to summarize learning. This isn't something I came up with. That's something ChatGPT came up with. And that's the way we can kind of leverage these tools. This is good content. This is things that are out there, and rather than linking to 100 different resources or making students buy a book about how to write a resume that's probably outdated already, even if it's only a year or two old, we can do this, and we can come back to this specific conversation, next spring before the class runs again, and we can say, hey, this class is running again. Is there anything we should update or change based on, recent findings or, best practices and things like that? And it will remember all these things that you've done, and it can go ahead and do that for you as well.
We do have a couple questions in the chat,
Yeah.
Dan. First, Keith just shared if folks don't want to upload their stuff to GPT or Copilot, LM Studio is an option that runs on your local computer.
Hmm.
But Renee asked, did you ask for the content to be accessible, or was that did that just happen?
Yeah, so you can ask specifically for accessible content. It made the Word document accessible. Usually it will do that on its own. And then what I was going to do is sort of take the outputs from ChatGPT and put it into Brightspace myself. So I knew I was going to make use of those accessible templates. So I didn't necessarily say make this accessible, but you can ask it to, make an accessible PowerPoint or things like that, and it will do that for you. I think that's always a good idea. Like I said, sort of even at the beginning, like making use of universal design for learning, making use of accessibility best practices, reminding it sort of to do those things is always a good idea.
All right, and Renee asked how you got the content into Brightspace. Did you just copy and paste that?
Yeah, so I go through it. You'll want to review it. You'll want to check it. You want to make sure it's all good. But essentially, it's a lot of copying and pasting. Those like accordions or tabs or templates that are available to everybody in Brightspace that you can use when you build content. So I'll pull up Brightspace on one window and ChatGPT on another, and it's just kind of creating the structure of the page and then copying and pasting the content over. And when I say copying and pasting, remember that's always with the caveat that we're reviewing that we've sort of checked it, read it over, make sure it's good. Uh, it's not always going to be a verbatim copy and paste, right? You're going to have to make some adjustments and updates. But yeah, it's a lot of copying and pasting, at least at the initial point, and then making sort of those changes and updates as you go.
And then Ken asks where you cite the use of AI in your OER.
Yeah, so I think that's where I showed that, and I'll go back to it. Um, So right here at the beginning on the very first page here, we have sort of this AI collaboration note where I'm mentioning that I've used ChatGPT as an assistant here to work through and create these materials. I think this is sort of a good best practice. Now, in terms of when we say cite, I think sometimes, what I think of as cite is sort of like those internal citations or like a works cited page. That's not necessarily something that you are required to do. We might want our students to cite AI if they're handing it in sort of a paper, but remember, sort of like academic integrity and what students submit, are they writing a research paper? Are they completing an assignment? Is a little bit different than this, where we're providing content to them. So, you don't necessarily need to have a citation. For instance, these learning objectives were created by ChatGPT. I don't need to have a citation after every single learning objective saying that this learning objective was created by ChatGPT or a reference page at the bottom everywhere. Um, Theoretically and legally, again, I'm not a lawyer and things are changing, but essentially you don't need to do anything. You could pass an entire course off that you created, and as long as you're not violating, as I mentioned before, those plagiarism or copyright issues where if ChatGPT, sort of took a lot from one source and you didn't realize it, taking something from ChatGPT and using it is not something that is illegal in any way, shape, or form.
Thanks, Dan. And are you ready for question time now?
Yeah,
Did you want to share any other?
yeah, absolutely.
And we will share out both the slides and the resources that Dan shared during this. So yeah, folks, if you've got questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or raise your hand and unmute. I just want to say I have learned a lot already. I love that you put in the reading level and that you asked it to chunk out the information when you asked it to categorize it into two things. I do use ChatGPT a lot, and all of these are new practices that I had not thought of.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead, Andre.
I have a question. First of all, thank you, Dan, for taking the time to do this and provide this information. And I apologize in advance. I'm one of those people who is very wary
Hmm.
of the mass integration of this technology and kind of seeing this fetishization of it being pushed within higher education. And I think it's just a good opportunity for me to be able to ask. At the outset of this session, you mentioned that our primary goal is to better serve our students, and that two obstacles that we have that AI allows us to answer, which I think all of us would agree on, is the idea of busyness, right?
Hmm.
How the workload that we have, and just not having enough time, and also the idea of like the fiscal overhead for
Hmm.
students. And I guess one question that I don't hear asked or answered very often is why advocate for AI as the solution to busyness rather than maybe rethinking what the workload for a teacher looks like?
Hmm.
uh, and because do you feel that there is the possibility, or one of the concerns I have, and I hope you might be able to address, is that these seeming efficiencies will just won't lead to me having more time, but will lead to an expectation for me to do
Yeah.
more in the limited time I already have. Um, and also I worry too as it goes on, if we're looking at overhead on that side of it, is that as we embrace this technology, uh, at what point do we recognize that the biggest overhead that we could eliminate is that of teacher salaries? If, with
Yeah.
the confluence of not just the predictive text kind of Gen AI that we see with ChatGPT, but also deep fake technology and voice synthesis, or what's to stop us from just having, administrators saying like, okay, generate me like a course of so many classes that
Hmm.
meet for this long, where it's, I just was wondering if you could speak a little bit to
Yeah.
why AI rather than those.
No, I think all of your points are very valid and true, and I think we're already sort of on the way. I know Arizona State, they have like sort of a global campus. They have a big online presence, and they have, I believe, they've already implemented sort of a chat bot using ChatGPT basically to scrape each and every course so that it's available 24/7 to students online, that they can type in and have that conversation to sort of take that at least first step rather than a student emailing a teacher and waiting, 24 to 48 hours. You can plug it in at 3 in the morning and get your response right away. So I think that it sort of is already headed down that pathway to an extent. I think ideally, right, we would rather be able to do this work ourselves, and um, that is a good point, but it's not one that we can always, handle in the short term, right? Those are budgeting concerns and all the other things that an administrator on campus will give you that, and you've heard that all before, and I think that's sort of the reasoning behind it, and it can be a slow process to do that. So I think your concern of, this makes you more efficient, you're going to get even more work, or eventually is this going to get so good that you're going to be out of work. Those are all valid. I think they're still pretty far away from that. I think there's going to need to be, I think, again, the biggest value here, at least for a while, and this could change over the course of time, is that prompt engineering and having somebody that can sort of be that intermediary between what these tools can do and what your students need, and trying to mesh that is where we can be really helpful in this process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dan. And Ben asked about LM Studio, and it looks like Ken responded. LM Studio is a local
Right.
language model that can run on your computer. Jess asks if AI can help with streamlining of grading essays.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised that there's really not much that it can't do. And I would say that the worst that's ever going to happen to you is if you ask a question, it's going to give you something you don't like and you don't have to use. So back to that idea of being conversational, you could it could help streamline those essays. But again, this is something that I think where you'll also want to be aware of, and there are settings that you can adjust, privacy settings and things like that. If you're taking the student's work and you're putting it into ChatGPT, ChatGPT now has that as an input that you gave it. So that's where you're going to want to be careful with things like, do you have permission to do that from your students? Is a student's name on that? Those types of things, because when you input it, it's there and it has it. It certainly can. Something that I do a lot of times with my assignments and discussion boards is I'll put my assignment in there. I'll put a rubric in there. I'll put the discussion prompts in there. And then I'll ask it to give me sort of like some generic feedback starters. So maybe it gives me, 50 words on the broader scope of the idea, or, hey, great job. And then X, Y, and Z is why this is important moving forward. And I can use that as sort of a starter for all of my feedback. And then I get in there and provide more individual or specific feedback. But it certainly can help give you, create rubrics for those essays. If you're trying to be a more efficient grader, you can put in the prompts for those essays, and it can create really good rubrics that I think would help you. And I think I would suggest starting there. And then you can also, like I said, ask it to create some text-based feedback that you could give or could help you fill those rubrics out too.
Yeah, and Jill had suggested the same thing, peer review rubrics. So yeah, it could create a rubric for you, give that to your students. They could peer review each other's essays. Melissa asks if you can talk a bit about GPT detector bias against non-native writers of English and how it can affect faculty entering their own content or that of their students.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting sort of area that I'm not sold really that there is a good detector of what is and is not created by generative AI out there. If you give a sort of a very basic generic prompt, you might sometimes get those basic generic answers. But if you get very specific and you're doing things sort of with that prompt engineering, it's going to be very hard to tell the difference between, was that created by somebody's independent thought or ChatGPT. It's very unique, right? The more we engineer that prompt, the more unique the output's going to be. So I'm not sure, exactly how it's always going to be able to differentiate those. And I think there's been a lot of issues with that, where it's sort of these, false positives and then also missing some. So I would be wary of those detectors out there. I definitely do think that the language and the way that maybe non-native writers do write could certainly influence that as well. So something that we want to be aware of. Always take those things with a grain of salt. I think Turnitin is great to say this came from this source, but it might not be so great to say this came from ChatGPT.
Yeah, we have just a couple more minutes. If anyone's got an additional question. I really appreciate that you walked us through the example, because like I said, there were so many things I hadn't considered. I loved the real world story example when you said make a 500-word story.
Yeah,
And I think that students might resonate with that a lot more than just reading a textbook, you know, in
yeah,
front of them
absolutely.
about the same thing. Well, it looks like the questions are just about done. If anyone has a question, you can throw it in. But we want to thank everyone for coming and thank Dan very much for this great presentation. Like I said, we will share out both the recording link and the slides that include a resource list from Dan that can help you with further reading and learning about this.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate your time and for being here. And if there's anything I can ever do to help, my email will be included on those slides as well.